Oh, chubbicorn.
This tutorial is my version of Chinese landscape painting. It is done out of admiration and respect. I do not claim to be an expert or master in this style. So to start off, you need some paper. And by the way, my son edited and added the music to this. So you need a brush. I'm going to use a bamboo brush like this one. And then these are some other options that were gifted to me a while ago. These are really nice bamboo brushes. So you can see the fine point and the large brush area, which allows for a lot of ink to be held, or a lot of wash to be held there. You'll also need some water, and you will need some ink. I'm using Sumi ink by Yasutomo, which is a really nice dark ink, and we will be mixing the water and the ink in a bowl. So first, let's go ahead and pour some water. Okay, so next I'm going to take the Sumi ink, and we'll shake it a little bit and then mix it into the water. You don't need a lot of the Sumi ink, just I would say a couple drops. It goes a long way. So you can see I just have a little bit there. And then use the brush to mix up the ink. And we're pretty much ready to go at this point. Okay, so what I'll do is a couple of different styles. This is the island style, where I'm going with triangular brush strokes and creating a shoreline with horizontal brush strokes. So notice that the brush strokes meet at the peaks, and then I follow up with horizontal brush strokes down below. So again, this is my style of Chinese landscape. This is my interpretation, so you'll see where it varies and is different from if you've ever witnessed a master paint, you'll see my style is different. So there's the shorelines, and this one's pretty much done. I'm going to go ahead and mark a little bit more, let that one dry off to the side. And then our next one this is the one we'll focus on for the video. This will be diagonal mountain range, disappearing into clouds. So you notice I'm deliberately planning out the cloud base. So my triangular brush strokes, like before, are going at a diagonal this time. So you see how they're starting off low on the left and high on the right. And then I'm planning for the clouds to be down below. And just filling in that space. Now, typically you would have a cup of clear water to thin out the wash so you could add some value. But I just like blocks of gray color for my style. So here's the lowest mountain range in the foreground. So this will have more detail and be larger in scale. And then way in the distance for some scale, we'll have another range. And notice how small and lacking detail this mountain range is, but it also descends to the left. Okay, now for a side lesson here. So when you have a wash of inks, let's pretend that island is one wash. You want to draw your hills on the lowest part. Give yourself a little bit of flat space for a shoreline. That's where you can add the village and trees like I'm doing here. You can also add a little village into the mountain if you want to. But notice how the hills are the lowest, and then the foothills, and then the mountains behind it. So you want to make sure you overlap properly. I'm adding a dock here as well. So this is the other one that we're going to be focusing on, the diagonal mountain range. I'm going to trace it in Sharpie just so you can see it better. So we have imagine that's the ink wash. We want to start low and draw one range behind the other, one mountain behind the other. Except right there, you can kind of mix it up with other mountains. But try to keep it consistent. The lowest mountain is going to be on the left, the highest, most distant mountain on the right. And then I'm adding some structure, some trees, and a little village there. So this is what we'll be doing with the brushwork. All right, now back to our wash. So we have some options. First of all, I'm going to be using a smaller bowl. This is a little dish that's going to be pure Sumi ink. And I'm going to be using this liner brush. But you also have some options with this brush, which is my favorite. It's a Kuretake brush pen. It actually has refillable ink. And then this is a Copic Gasenfude, which is not refillable, but also a really good brush pen. But I'll be using traditional ink and brush for this. So we'll just pour just a little bit. A little goes a long way. You can see it's a small, like dime-sized spot of ink, and it really is very, very solid, and that can last easily the entire painting. In fact, I have extra at the end of this. Starting off with the distant mountains, I'll draw some fine line work, and you notice I'm starting on the left side and making that one in front, and the ones to the right are behind it sequentially. Also trying to add some structures, texture. You want to make sure that your ink wash is fully dry before you do this step. I let the ink wash dry for at least an hour in this tutorial. Now I'm establishing the trees. This is really important to get your scale of your trees down. So I'm using the mountain range in the back with the smallest trees, so I know how large to make them in the foreground and the middle ground. Now this is something that you may or may not want to do. My style tends to skew more cartoony, so I'm going to outline the cloud shapes, but the masters on some of the landscapes that I've seen will tend to use lighter and lighter washes, so the mountains disappear into like a mist. So again, this is my cartoony style, inspired by Chinese landscapes. Adding some trees in between the clouds, and just kind of establishing the lines that I find the most important. So you notice how I'm overlapping the clouds too, to emphasize the clouds on the left are the closest to us. And then we'll go with the next range. Notice the trees are a little more detailed, a little bit larger. Also, the mountain structures will be a little bit more detailed as well. Now, from my understanding of Chinese landscapes, or from some of my research on just how they came to be, they started off as a reaction against modern life or city life, and artists and poets were drawn to nature. And so these landscapes were like a reverence to nature, to emphasize their connection with open space and the wilderness. And so oftentimes you'll see a Chinese landscape or a Japanese landscape that is accompanied with a poem. And later the landscapes developed into more of a representation of heart and mind, so of the artist or poet's thoughts or inner workings of their mind or their feelings. And so it was less about a specific place, and they started to become more ethereal. So this range, of course, was just ink washes that look like mountains, so obviously it's not representing a specific place. So you can see the clouds are a lot more detailed. The puffy lines are larger because this mountain range is far closer than the distant one. And then I'm just populating it with some pine trees. Now I keep the pine trees relatively low. We have in mountains what's called a tree line, and beyond the tree line is basically the conditions are too either arid or cold or dry or volatile for trees to establish themselves. So you'll have, even our local mountains in Southern California here, we have a tree line. Our mountains are high enough to basically be where, an elevation where trees can't grow any further. Okay, so this one you can see I switched the brush. I don't know if I kind of showed the brush there. This one has a shorter tip, and but it's actually a little bit wider, so it provides a more bold line. And that's what I want for the landscape that's in the foreground. I want to emphasize larger trees and thicker outlines for the clouds and the mountains. So I'm going to put a little village, a couple houses here, rooftops with trees surrounding them. And to be honest, I'm just filling in the trees around the village because it looked weird, just the way that I positioned those houses or those structures. So by hiding the awkwardness of them being just on this open slope, it just looks a little better if they're surrounded by trees. It hides kind of the weird, like, exposed village that really wouldn't necessarily be right there, I guess. And then we have our final closer mountain range. What I love about brush pens and using brush and ink is the variation of line. You can have really, really fine lines or very thick lines all with the same brush or brush pen. And so you'll notice like this mountain range that we see here, the mountain on the far right, you can see there's a nice thick line leading up to it. And if you're skilled enough, you can actually use thicker lines for more emphasis on areas you want the viewer to look. So areas that have more shading or that are more important, you can add a bolder line and it'll just naturally draw the eye there. So some trees, got a little bit of that, and then I'm going to add a village further up in this range here. But first, more trees. Now look at the size of these trees. They're a little bit larger than the range behind it. Now this time, those structures that I'm drawing, you can see the roof tiles, and there's a balcony there because this village is a lot closer. Again, surrounded by trees to hide the fact that I'm not good at drawing mountain streets or infrastructure. It's just I don't know. Just want to draw a couple rooftops implying that there is a village there. Not really worrying about how the roads connect or how they are layered into the structure. Okay, so now you can see I've shaded quite a bit already. You can see I'm holding the colored pencil. This is where my style deviates a lot from traditional landscape painting or Chinese landscape painting. They use ink wash of different color. I'm using colored pencil because it gives a nice texture. It's easier to control, and I've already added ink lines. And this particular sumi ink is not waterproof, so if I were to try to add a wash on top of that, it would just make a mess. So I'm coloring in the pine trees with a dark green. And then you can see I have a cool shadow on the right side of all the mountains, so the light source would be on the left side. All right, now the rooftops are going to be reddish, and then just some cool blue for the shadow side of those structures, just to give a little bit of a late afternoon shading. And then now I'm shading the clouds with the blue color pencil on the right side of all the clouds, giving a little bit of cast shadow on some of the other clouds behind them. I think it'd be really cool if I did an orange glow. If this were late afternoon, an orange glow or yellowish glow would look nice on the left side of the slopes and on the left side of the clouds as well. That might be something I want to add to this later. Alright, so we're finishing up here, just a little more shading around all of these clouds. Not much. I probably could have added more, but I wanted to keep it kind of in the same style of the traditional landscape paintings, where you see a lot of just the parchment or the off-white. Usually it's parchment of the traditional Chinese landscape paintings, so you'll have this ethereal use of the base paper as part of the art rather than everything being colored. And then smaller details for the distant clouds. And with that, we're pretty much done. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed my son's editing skills. Check out Scully, that's his channel.